My stomach was a knot of ice, a cold fist of dread tightening with every tick of the rusty clock on the wall. The silence in the cottage was heavier than usual, a suffocating blanket woven from my father's quiet anger and the unspoken truth that hung between us. Today wasn't just any day. It was the eve of the day that would change my life forever. The debt was due. I knew what that meant, even though he'd never said the words. He never called me Elara. He only called me girl, as if my name, my very identity, was a burden he couldn't afford to carry. The air crackled with a tension that felt physical, a suffocating pressure that made my lungs burn. I went through the motions of the day, tending to the meager garden, the dry soil cracking beneath my fingers and sweeping the dirt floor that would never truly be clean. It was a dance of resignation, a performance I'd mastered over a lifetime of being a ghost in my own home. I was a functional object, not a person. My worth was transactional, a fact as ingrained in me as the dirt under my nails. My father, a man with eyes as empty as his heart, watched me with a chilling finality. I tried to focus on the vibrant red of the few poppies that had managed to bloom in the harsh soil, their petals a defiant splash of color against the drab gray of our lives. They were a reminder, a small, rebellious hope that beauty could still exist. I clung to that thought, but the wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of pine and something else, something wild and ancient. That night, sleep was a stranger. The moonlight, cold and indifferent, spilled through the cracks in the walls, illuminating the small, pathetic bundle of belongings I had packed. A single threadbare blanket, a loaf of stale bread, and a small, smooth river stone I'd found as a child. That's all I had to my name. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to fly. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was a desperate, foolish hope. I was going to run. The plan was as flimsy as a spiderweb and just as easily broken. The forest that bordered our land was a dark, intimidating wall of trees, a place of shadows and forgotten things. But then, a low, guttural howl echoed from the trees, closer than I'd ever heard before. It was a sound that didn't just rattle the windows, it rattled my very bones. It was a sound of immense, predatory power. My muscles seized, my carefully constructed courage. It evaporated like morning mist under a harsh sun. The question hammered in my head. Was I even worth saving? Was my life so valuable that I should risk the known misery of my father for the unknown terror of that forest? The familiar cage of my home, for all its cruelty, was predictable. The wild, it was not. I sank back onto my cot, the bundle of my possessions slipping from my trembling hands. The failed escape attempt reinforced the misbelief that I was powerless. I felt like a leaf on a torrent, destined to go wherever the current took me. The morning sun cast long, menacing shadows. My father sat at the rickety table, his face a mask of stone. Before I could even stir from my cot, the silence outside was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats and the rustle of heavy cloth. A procession of powerful, intimidating figures led by the Lycan King Kaelan arrived at our cottage. Their presence was a physical force, a weight that stilled the birds in the trees and hushed the entire village. They were not violent. Their power was a quiet storm, a pressure that radiated from them with every step. My heart clawed at my throat. Kaelan, a man with eyes the color of a winter sky and a jawline carved from granite, dismounted his massive black wolf. He ignored my father and looked directly at me. His gaze was intense, assessing, as if he wasn't looking at a person, but at a puzzle he was determined to solve. The space between us burned, the air thickened, and just like that, everything changed. I felt it, a strange, deep pull, like a compass needle pointing north. My father, seeing Kaelan's gaze fixed on me, finally spoke, his voice devoid of all warmth. "She is the price," he said, pushing me forward, his hand on my back a cold brand. That night I hadn't known what scared me more, the howl of the wolf or the silence of my own father. Now, in the stillness that followed, I knew. The first thing she felt was the cold stone floor beneath her cheek. It was rough and unforgiving, a stark contrast to the luxurious sheets she had been given. Her mind was a hazy whirlwind of images. Her father's empty eyes, the silent village, the sheer terror of the ambush. Then she saw Kaelan's face, his intense, assessing gaze, and the memory of his possessive words, "She is the price." The finality of it all was a heavy chain around her heart. Her world in Greyhaven was over. It had been sold, and she was the currency. The deep-seated belief that she was nothing more than an object, a thing to be traded, was now cemented into her very bones. This was it, the start of her new reality as a possession. The inciting incident felt less like a spark and more like a crushing blow. The air in the small, dusty cottage had been thick with tension, a palpable unease that made her skin crawl. Kaelan, a figure of intimidating power, stood before her father. His wolf, a massive beast of midnight fur and glacial eyes, was a silent, lethal promise of what his power truly meant. Her father, a man who had never looked at her with an ounce of warmth, finally looked at her. But it wasn't a look of affection. It was a look of immense relief. He saw a debt being paid, a burden lifted. The contract, yellowed with age, was the physical manifestation of her worthlessness. When Kaelan's large, calloused hand met her father's, sealing the deal with a firm grip, a jolt of energy shot through the room. It wasn't a magic of light and wonder. It was cold and binding, a finality that echoed in the very silence that followed. Kaelan's voice, a low rumble that felt like thunder, broke the quiet. "She is under the protection of my crown and my pack law." The words were not for her, but for the villagers watching from a safe distance, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. It was a declaration of ownership, a public branding. Elara felt a scream well up in her throat, a primal protest against being a thing. Her hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to yell, to shout, "I am not property." But the words choked on the air of fear that surrounded her. The raw violation of it all was a sickening taste in her mouth. She felt a profound sense of loss, not just for the home she was leaving, but for the person she had never been allowed to become. Without warning, her father turned and walked away. He didn't look back. There was no goodbye, no final glance of regret or even remorse. Just an empty space where he had stood. The finality of his action was more devastating than any blow. It confirmed every misbelief she had about herself. She was a pawn, a tool, a thing to be discarded the moment her use was over. What followed was a journey, a blur of silent defiance. She was led away, her feet stumbling over the rough terrain. The forest, once a place of terrifying unknowns, now seemed like a lost sanctuary. As they walked deeper into the woods, her mind replayed the scene at the cottage, a painful loop of her father's face and Kaelan's cold proclamation. She had been sold and claimed, her worst fear realized. The only thing she had left was her rage, a simmering heat in her belly. The journey to the Moonstone Citadel felt endless, a procession of powerful, silent figures. She was a tiny, fragile human surrounded by a wall of predatory grace. She refused to speak, her lips pressed into a thin, defiant line. She was a prisoner, and she would not make it easy for her captor. Kaelan rode beside her, a dominant presence even on the back of his wolf. He was a king, every line of his body speaking of authority and control. At one point, he dismounted, his movements fluid and powerful, and offered her a small water skin. "Drink," he said, his voice a low command. She turned her head away, her eyes fixed on the forest floor. He sighed, a sound that was more a rumble than a breath. "You are in danger, girl. We are taking you somewhere safe. This is for your own protection." His words were cold, formal, and utterly without comfort. He spoke of law and necessity, not of care or concern. Because of that, his reassurances felt like threats. She was an object he was safeguarding, not a person he was protecting. Her goal was to maintain some shred of defiance, to show him that while he might own her body, Her will was still hers. The struggle inside her was a hurricane of emotions. Was she to fight this powerful king, a being so far beyond her understanding? Or was she to revert to the survival strategy she had mastered with her father? Appeasement? She knew what her father would have done. He would have bowed, scraped, and obeyed. Maybe it was the memory of that empty walk away that fueled her resistance. She would not be like him. Her thoughts spun, a frantic whirlpool of confusion and anger. What was the debt? What was so important about her that a Lycan king would come for her in person? These were questions that didn't have answers yet, open loops that kept her mind racing. Suddenly, the air thickened. A sharp metallic scent filled her senses. Before she could move, a flurry of arrows shot from the trees. "Ambush!" a voice roared. The world exploded into motion. Kaelan's guards, in a blur of motion, shifted into massive, snarling wolves. Their forms, once human, became a terrifying symphony of muscle and fur. She watched, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, as they fought with a raw, brutal elegance she had never imagined. This was the wild, lethal violence Kaelan had spoken of. This was the reality of his world. The brutal skirmish was over as quickly as it began. The forest, which had been alive with the sounds of battle, fell into an eerie silence, save for the heavy panting of the wolves. A Gravewood scout was captured, his face contorted in a mask of hate. His eyes, dark and feral, locked onto Elara's. "The key will open the gates of ruin," he snarled, his voice a rasping promise of destruction. Then, with a final defiant curse, he was silenced. Kaelan, his face a mask of grim fury, gave a sharp order to his men. "To the citadel. Now." The abstract danger he had mentioned was no longer abstract. It was real, visceral, and terrifying. Her defiance, the small flame of rebellion she had been nursing, was instantly extinguished. Fear, cold and sharp, took its place. She was no longer just a commodity. She was something more, something dangerous. And Kaelan wasn't just a powerful king. He was her only shield. Her immediate goal shifted from defiance to survival. She was locked into the conflict, caught between two warring forces, with Kaelan as her unwilling protector. The last leg of the journey was silent. The Moonstone Citadel, a fortress carved into the very heart of a mountain, rose majestically before them. Its spires, tipped with what looked like polished moonstone, pierced the sky like jagged teeth. It was breathtaking, but to her, it looked like a prison, a beautiful, formidable cage. The gates, massive slabs of ancient wood and iron, swung open for them and then closed again with a resounding thud. It sounded, to Elara's ears, like the door to her new cell. A gilded cage, to be sure, but a cage all the same. In that moment, her chest ached with a profound loneliness. She was an object that had just been exchanged, a key meant to unlock either salvation or ruin, and she had no say in which door would be opened. My new home was a stark, almost cruel contrast to the small, dirt-floored cottage I had left behind. My quarters were a sprawling space with a high ceiling, and the windows, though barred, looked out onto a breathtaking view of the mountainous landscape. I was given clothes of soft, fine linen and food that smelled of spices and richness I'd never known. But despite the luxury, I was a prisoner, guarded by stern-faced Lycans whose eyes followed my every move with a mix of suspicion and reverence. My goal was to understand my prison, to find a weakness, a chink in the formidable armor of the citadel. I explored a small section, my feet silent on the polished stone floors. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting the history of the Lycan pack, with a recurring motif of a massive silver wolf. The pack members I passed watched me with hushed whispers, a quiet buzz of curiosity and caution. I was a walking paradox, a nobody from a remote village who was now the center of the Alpha King's attention. The loneliness was a physical ache, a hollow space in my chest that no amount of luxury could fill. As I walked, my eyes fell on a grand archway that led to a large, ornate door. It was the Citadel's library, a place that, from what I could see, held a universe of knowledge. As if pulled by a string, I moved toward it, the promise of books a siren's call to my restless mind. Before I could reach the door, a massive guard, his face a grim mask of duty, stepped in front of me. "The Alpha has forbidden it," he said, his voice a deep, unyielding rumble. The disappointment was a sharp knife in my gut. My first attempt at agency, at finding a small piece of myself in this new world, had been denied. The rules of my prison were becoming clear, and the most important one was this: my mind, like my body, was not free. I refused to be a passive prisoner. My first rebellion had been a quiet one, a small act of defiance. I found the kitchens, a chaotic, bustling heart of the citadel that smelled of hearth and home. My hands, calloused and used to hard work, found purpose there. I kneaded dough, my movements a rhythm I knew in my bones. The other servants, mostly Omegas and humans, watched me with curiosity. It was here that I met Lila, a young Omega with eyes full of a kindness I hadn't seen in years. She had a nervous smile and a quiet strength. We worked together, a comfortable silence stretching between us. My goal was simple: to create a small space of normalcy and purpose for myself. This small act of agency, this willingness to work with my hands, slowly began to shift the perception of the pack. I wasn't just the price anymore. I was Elara, the girl who worked in the kitchens. Not only that, my quiet defiance led to a fragile friendship. Lila, in a moment of reckless courage, secretly gave me a simple book. A history of the Lycan people, a worn volume she had stolen from a common area. It was a lifeline, a small, quiet act of friendship that felt more valuable than all the silks and jewels in the citadel. The gift was a warm, soft feeling in my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone saw me for who I was, not what I was. This was a new storyline, a subplot of quiet rebellion and burgeoning friendship that ran parallel to the main plot of my captivity. The book, a seemingly innocent gift, held the key to a truth Kaelan was hiding from me. The fragile piece was shattered by a flash of silver and the sharp taste of betrayal. One of Kaelan's trusted courtiers, a man who had smiled and nodded at me, tried to poison my food. His goal was to kill me, to end the prophecy before it began. But he failed. Kaelan's personal guard, a massive wolf with the scent of pine and stone, had been watching all along. The spy was exposed and executed publicly, a swift, brutal display of justice that left me trembling. The danger wasn't just outside the walls anymore, it was inside. My trust, a fragile thing to begin with, was utterly shattered. It was a cruel reminder that I was alone, a pawn in a game I didn't understand. Kaelan found me afterward, his face a grim mask of fury and concern. He looked at me, not as a pawn, but as a person. "This is why you are not free," he said, his voice low and intense. "This is why you are mine to protect." His words, meant to reassure, felt like a brand, a permanent mark of my ownership. But for the first time, I heard something else in his voice. Fear. A deep, bone-deep fear that his ancestors' failure would be repeated. The story of a previous key, a prophecy that went wrong. It was an open loop, a new mystery that fueled my curiosity. The scene ends, leaving me with a question. What kind of prison is a shield? And who is the real prisoner? It was clear that Kaelan, for all his power, was a prisoner of his own legacy and his own fear. And I was a prisoner of both. The silence that followed his words was a heavy thing, filled with unspoken truths and the promise of a far greater danger to come. Elara's hands trembled as she clutched the worn book. The page was a whirlwind of ancient script and stark drawings, the prophecy of the key of bone and blood. The words felt like they were written in fire, burning into her mind. She wasn't just a key to save the Lycans. She was also the key to their destruction. The prophecy spoke of a terrible power, a first rot that could be unleashed to annihilate them all. The truth was a sickening wave that washed over her, chilling her to the bone. Kaelan wasn't just protecting a treasure, he was containing a doomsday device, She was the device. The core emotional question, is my value in what I am or in who I choose to be, now had a horrifying, terrifying answer. She was the potential oblivion. This wasn't about her survival anymore. It was about the fate of an entire race, a fate tied directly to her very existence. The open loop of Kaelan's past with a previous key suddenly snapped into terrifying focus. What had happened to them? Was this her fate too? The library had been her sanctuary, a silent fortress of knowledge. Now it was the place where her world unraveled. With the book Lila gave her, she had been piecing together the spy's last words. The gates of ruin. What she found was far worse than she could have imagined. The prophecy was real. It was a terrifying mirror, showing her a face she didn't recognize, a face of immense power and equal potential for destruction. She knew then that she had to get into the forbidden library. The small section of Citadel history wasn't enough. She needed the whole truth, the truth Kaelan was hiding from her. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she went to Lila. Her voice was a low whisper filled with a new kind of urgency. Lila, I need your help. I have to get into the main library, tonight. Lila, her kind eyes wide with fear, shook her head. I can't, Elara. The guards are everywhere. The Alpha, he would have me exiled. He's hiding something, Elara insisted, her voice trembling with the force of her conviction. Something about the prophecy. Something that explains why a man tried to poison me, and why Kaelan won't let me go. Knowledge is power, Lila, and I am tired of being powerless. What followed was a slow, painful process of persuasion. Elara spoke of her fear, of the man who had tried to kill her, of the look in Kaelan's eyes when he spoke of her protection. She appealed to Lila's sense of justice and their fragile friendship, and eventually, Lila relented. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but we have to be quick and quiet. No one can see us. Later that night, as the moon cast long shadows, they snuck into the library. The massive doors creaked open, revealing a breathtaking sight. Shelves upon shelves of ancient books, a silent testament to centuries of history. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather, a smell that had always brought her comfort. Tonight, it felt like the scent of a trap. Inside the library, the world tilted on its axis. Elara found the full prophecy. It wasn't a story of salvation, it was a story of a choice. The key would not just save the Lycans, it had the equal potential to unleash the first rot, a dark, consuming power that could destroy them all. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't just a potential savior, she was a weapon for either side. She wasn't just a treasure, she was a ticking clock. The discovery was a profound, life-altering shock. The core question that had haunted her, is my value in what I am, or in who I choose to be? Now had a terrifying new dimension. Her value was in her potential for destruction. Her very existence was a threat. My God, she whispered, her voice a ghost in the vast, silent room. Suddenly, a blaring alarm shattered the stillness. It wasn't a fire alarm, but a deep, guttural horn that resonated through the mountain itself. She ran to the window, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. What she saw was a scene of utter chaos, fire and fighting on the outer perimeter, a full-scale attack by the Gravewood Pack. The siege was real. Gorth wasn't just lurking in the shadows. He was here. She was so focused on the chaos outside that she didn't hear him. She didn't smell him. She just felt his presence behind her, a wave of raw, contained power. Kaelan stood in the doorway, his face grim and smudged with soot, a fresh gash on his cheek. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were fixed on the prophecy scroll in her hands. The moment their eyes locked, the lies were over. The truth unraveled between them. His secrets were out in the open, and her trust, a fragile thing to begin with, was shattered. Elara, he began, his voice a low, warning growl. Don't, she cut him off, her voice trembling with a volatile mix of anger, fear, and betrayal. Don't you dare call me by my name, I'm not after this. He took a step toward her, his movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a wild animal. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she spat back, her voice rising with every word. "I understand that you didn't buy me to save me. You bought me to cage me. You weren't protecting a person. You were containing a bomb. All this time, you were just guarding your weapon." He flinched, the words striking him like a physical blow. "It wasn't like that." "Wasn't it?" she challenged, her voice filled with a desperate rage. "Which one am I, Kaelan? The savior or the destroyer? The key that opens the gates of ruin or the key that locks them forever?" Her words hung in the air, a final accusation. The dynamic between them had shifted irrevocably. He could no longer treat her as an ignorant ward, a passive object. She was now a player who knew the stakes. Her newfound knowledge was a dangerous tool, and it was clear that she was going to use it. The scene ends with the two of them standing in the silent library, the chaos of the battle still raging outside, the space between them burning with unspoken truths. The confrontation in the library was a raw, volatile explosion of truth. Elara's anger was a storm, but her heart, her core strength, was empathy. As Kaelan stood there, silent and wounded, she saw not just his authority, but his burden. His face, streaked with soot and blood, was a map of his failure and his fear. He finally broke the silence, his voice a low, pained confession. "My ancestor. He had a key, too. A long time ago. He failed her. He was too possessive, too controlling. He tried to lock her away from the world, from her destiny. And when Gorath found her, she was unprepared. The Great Schism, the creation of the Gravewood faction, it was all because of his failure. It was all because of his fear." The weight of his words hung in the air, a heavy cloak of history and regret. Elara's anger, fueled by her own pain, began to temper. She saw a man, not a king, a man haunted by the past, a prisoner of a history he was desperate not to repeat. She saw her father and Gorath, men who saw her as an object, and Kaelan, for all his flaws, was beginning to see her as a person. It was a small flicker of hope in a sea of despair. "If I am the weapon," she declared, her voice now firm and resolute, "then I will learn how to aim it. No more hiding, no more caging. Teach me everything." This was the turning point. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was a player. She made a choice to face her destiny head-on, to become the master of her own power, not a victim of it. She was choosing to define her own worth, to answer the core question of the narrative with her actions. The training began. It wasn't physical combat. It was a more dangerous game. Kaelan taught her lore, the ancient history of their people, the nature of Lycan magic, the secrets of the prophecy. They spent hours in the library, the forbidden place now open to her. The atmosphere between them was still tense, but a fragile trust was beginning to form. He was no longer her owner. He was her mentor. As they worked, their conversations deepened. She learned of the Gravewood's dark magic, a corruption that twisted the very nature of their power. She learned of Gorath, a man driven by a twisted prophecy, a man who believed the only way to save their race was to destroy it and start anew. They discovered the destructive part of the prophecy could only be triggered by a ritual requiring a place of immense corrupted power, and a willing sacrifice. Their dynamic shifted from owner, property, to mentor, student, and in the quiet moments something more began to bloom between them. A silent understanding, a shared burden, a reluctant alliance. This alliance, born of necessity and fear, was their greatest strength. Meanwhile, Gorath, sensing this new alliance, sent a message. It was a captured and brutalized pack member from a neutral territory, a nameless man with a single chilling note pinned to his chest. "The key will not be taught. It will be turned." The message was a direct attack on their new partnership, a warning that Gorath was watching and would do anything to break them. The new intelligence, a captured Gravewood scout who had survived the siege, told of a weapons shipment. Kaelan, acting on this new information, decided to intercept it. He gave Elara a strict order. "Stay here. Stay safe." But she knew, deep in her heart, that it was a diversion. It was a trap. She acted as an independent agent for the first time, using her knowledge from the prophecy to investigate a potential internal threat. She confronted Kaelan's seneschal, a stern old Lycan named Alaric. "The weapons shipment is a ruse," she stated, her voice full of a new, quiet authority. "Goreth is not after weapons. He's after something else, something he can use to complete his ritual." Alaric, his eyes narrowed with suspicion, initially scoffed at her, but she had evidence, small details from the prophecy and the captured scout's ravings that made him reconsider. With her help, they uncovered the truth. Goreth wasn't looking for a weapons shipment. He was seeking the location of a cursed altar, a place of immense corrupted power. The perfect place for his ritual. She realized with a sickening lurch of her stomach that the altar was located near her old home, Greyhaven. Goreth wasn't just after her. He was after her history. He knew her past was her weakness, and he was using it against her. She had taken a huge risk, and her actions would have massive consequences. She had gone from a pawn to a player, and now, for the first time, she felt the weight of that responsibility. The scene ends with Elara staring at a map of her old home, the truth a heavy stone in her hand. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. The stage was set for a final, deadly confrontation. The Citadel was a storm of focused activity. The news of Goreth's new plot had spread like wildfire, and every pack member was on high alert. Kaelan, his face a mask of grim determination, was preparing his war party. Elara, having delivered the crucial intelligence, was a whirlwind of anxiety. She couldn't shake the feeling of dread, a cold, creeping sensation that something was terribly wrong. She kept replaying the image of the map in her mind, the familiar lines of her old home, Greyhaven. It felt too personal, too pointed. But then, the alarm came. It wasn't the guttural horn of a siege. It was a high-pitched, frantic sound that meant a member of the pack was in trouble. Kaelan's beta, a large, scarred wolf named Valen, burst into the war room. "Alpha!" he gasped, his chest heaving. It's Lila! She's gone!" Elara's heart stopped. She felt the blood drain from her face, a cold wave of shock and terror. Lila, her friend, the young Omega with the kind eyes and the nervous smile. The same Lila who had risked everything to get her the book, the same Lila she had promised to protect. A note was found in Lila's abandoned room. It was written in a spidery scrawl, and the words were like a fist to the gut. "The key's weakness is her empathy. Come to the altar, or your friend dies." The message was a direct attack on Elara's emotional core, a cruel and calculated strike against her budding sense of agency. Goreth knew. He knew that she wasn't just a weapon. She was a person who cared for others. He was using her empathy against her, turning her greatest strength into her greatest weakness. Elara's mind screamed in protest. This was all her fault. She was the one who had brought Lila into her dangerous world. She was the one who had put a target on her back. The guilt was a heavy stone in her stomach, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. She had to save her. She had to. Kaelan, his face a thundercloud of rage, saw the look in her eyes. "Elara, no, it's a trap, a diversion. You can't go." "I have to," she cried, her voice cracking with despair. "He has Lila because of me. I put her in danger. I have to be the one to get her out." "You are the key," Kaelan said, his voice hard with finality. "Your life is more important than one Omega." His words, meant to be a harsh reality, were a betrayal. They were a reminder of her transactional worth, a stark contrast to the small, tender moments they had shared. In that moment, he was not the mentor who had taught her lore. He was the king who saw her as a tool. The old wound of her father's neglect, of her worth being purely transactional, was ripped open and exposed. She felt the space between them burn with a new kind of fury. Ignoring the warnings of Kaelan's seneschal, she ran. She didn't have a plan. She only had a single desperate thought. Save Lila. The Citadel, once a gilded cage, now felt like a prison she had to escape. She grabbed a horse from the stables, its muscular body a blur of motion as she rode toward Greyhaven. She was falling right into Gorth's trap, her heart a frantic drumbeat of terror and guilt. The cursed altar was a place of immense corruption, a dark, jagged stone monument that seemed to suck the very light from the air. The trees around it were gnarled and twisted, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for a sky they would never touch. The air was thick with the cloying scent of blood and decay, a smell that made her stomach churn. Gorth stood at the altar, a towering figure of malevolence, his face a mask of cruel satisfaction. Lila was chained to the stone, her eyes wide with terror, her body bruised and shaking. "The key returns to her cage," Gorth sneered, his voice a low, gravelly sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. So predictable, so weak. Elara dismounted, her hands trembling. "Let her go, Gorth. This is between you and me." "Oh, it always was, little key," he said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "But I needed to remind you of your place. Your choices only ever lead to ruin." Just then, a growl ripped through the air, a sound of primal, unbridled fury. Kaelan, his war party a blur of motion behind him, attacked. He was a force of nature, a massive wolf with eyes of burning silver, a whirlwind of teeth and claws. But Gorth was ready. He had prepared. He held a small, dark stone in his hand, and as Kaelan lunged, he crushed it. Dark, forbidden magic surged, a wave of power that hit Kaelan with the force of a battering ram. The Alpha King staggered, a pained snarl escaping his lips. He was gravely wounded, his movements sluggish, his eyes filled with a new kind of pain. "I am a student of history, Alpha King," Gorth said, his voice filled with a chilling triumph. "And I learned from your ancestors' mistakes. The key must be contained, but the Alpha must be broken." Kaelan, with a final desperate snarl, was forced to retreat. His beta and a few loyal guards covered his escape, their forms a wall of muscle and fur between the Alpha and his enemy. Elara watched in horror as her only shield, her protector, was defeated. She was alone. Abject terror and despair washed over her. Her attempt at agency had led to utter disaster. The king was defeated, her friend was a hostage, and she was the prize. Gorth, his triumph a tangible thing, walked toward her. His eyes, dark and feral, held a cruel glint of victory. He grabbed her arm, his grip like a steel vice. "Now you see," he sneered. "Your choices only ever lead to ruin. It is what you are." He chained her to the altar, a chilling parody of a sacrifice. She watched as he began the ritual, his words a low, guttural chant that made the air itself vibrate with dark magic. The goal was to forcibly turn her into the destroyer. The ritual was a whirlwind of dark magic, a vortex of corrupted power that swirled around Elara. She was trapped in her own mind, her body a vessel for Gorth's ambition. Her deepest fear, her core misbelief, screamed at her from the shadows. She saw her father selling her, Kaelan claiming her, and now Gorth using her. They all saw her as a thing, a tool, a catalyst for their own ambitions. She was nothing but a key that would open the gates of ruin. She had no goal. She had given up. Utter despair, a black, bottomless pit of resignation, consumed her. She accepted her fate as the destroyer. This was her dark night of the soul, her crucible moment. She had to find a reason to fight back from within, a reason to live, a reason to be more than a pawn. Suddenly, in the midst of the chaos, a small, quiet memory surfaced. It wasn't a memory of grand gestures or heroic deeds. It was a memory of Kaelan, not teaching her lore, but asking her name. A simple act of seeing her, not the key. A small, tender moment that had been lost in the sea of her fear and resentment. It was a simple question. "What is your name?" And his voice, in the echo of that memory, was not the cold baritone of a king, but the warm, deep sound of a man. This small, quiet memory was the spark. It was the crack in her despair, the chink in the armor of her resignation. She had an epiphany, a sudden, blinding flash of clarity. Her father and Gorath were the same. They only saw what she was. But Kaelan, for all his flaws and his overbearing control, was beginning to see who she was. Her value wasn't in her blood or her destiny. It was in the connections she chose to forge, the people she chose to protect. Her value was in her choices. She began to fight, not with her body, but with her mind, with her will. She subtly disrupted the ritual's influence, her defiance a small, stubborn flame in the face of Gorath's overwhelming power. Gorath, confused by the unexpected resistance, turned his full attention to breaking her will. He was so focused on her internal struggle that he didn't see the approaching storm. He didn't see the forest, a massive ancient wolf, standing at the edge of the clearing, his eyes a swirling vortex of anger and grief. The scene ends in silence, with Elara's eyes opening, a fierce, defiant light in their depths as the ritual's power surged. She was not the destroyer. Not yet. She was something else. A savior. A warrior. A queen. The ground shook. A low, bone-deep growl ripped through the night air, and it wasn't from Liam. The Varg Alpha, a beast of a wolf with fur the color of dried blood and eyes like burning coals, crashed through the trees. He was a force of pure, untamed rage, a whirlwind of muscle and teeth. In that moment, Elara didn't know what scared her more, this hulking monster, or the fact that Marcus, a wolf she had known her whole life, stood with a silver dagger, ready to betray his alpha. This was a nightmare. This was a betrayal. This was war. "You will not steal my power." The Varg Alpha's voice rumbled, a deep sound that echoed in the very core of her soul. "You will die trying." With every heartbeat, Elara felt the fear turn into something else. It turned into a fierce, protective love for Liam, a love so strong it felt like a living thing inside her. Her bones remembered him, and a surge of power, a cold silver heat, pulsed through her veins. This new power was a gift, a shield, because her wolf soul had finally awakened, and it was ready to fight. She wasn't just a mate. She was a lunar. Liam, despite the silver burning in his side, stood his ground. "Varg," he snarled, "your lies end tonight. My pack is dying because of you and your false healing." The Varg Alpha laughed, a chilling, inhuman sound. Just like that, he charged. The ground trembled. The air thickened. Elara knew they couldn't win this fight with brute strength alone. Maybe it was fate, but she had to trust in her new power and in Marcus. Even so, she had a secret weapon, the moonlight. So she lifted her hands, and the light from the moon came down, not just on her, but on Liam and Marcus too. It was like a blanket of silver, a shield of pure magic. Suddenly, Marcus moved, not to attack them, but to block the Varg Alpha's charge. "He's lying," Marcus shouted, his voice full of desperation. "The Sunstone is not a healing tool. It's a prison for an old evil." This was the final plot twist, the last piece of the puzzle. The Sunstone was not a cure. It was a lock, a cage. By trying to steal it, they were about to set loose something terrible. What's worse, they were walking right into a trap, not just from the Varg pack, but from an ancient evil. This was a whole new level of danger. A growl rose in her throat, and she let it happen. It was a new war, a new enemy, and a new kind of magic. Elara's new power was not a gift, but a responsibility, and she was ready for it. The fight was fast and brutal, a wild dance of teeth and claws and moonlight. Marcus, now fighting with them, moved with the speed of a beta, his movements a graceful blur. But then, as the Varg Alpha lunged for Liam, Elara did something without thinking. She pushed herself between them, and the moonlight around her became a solid wall of light. Varg slammed into it, and a cry of pain ripped from his lips as the power of the moon hit him, a power so strong it felt like an electric shock. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. What are you?" he stuttered. "I am the Luna," she said, her voice now steady and strong. Her world tilted. Something inside her shifted. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and wet earth. The space between them burned. Her chest ached. She was a weapon, a shield, a protector. She was Elara. While the Varg Alpha was still reeling, Marcus pointed to the cave. "Now!" he yelled. "Go! I'll hold him off!" Liam looked at Elara, his amber eyes filled with a mix of awe and worry. "Go," he whispered. "We have to know the truth." The tension broke. They ran toward the cave, leaving Marcus to fight the Varg Alpha. The cave was dark, a gaping maw in the side of the mountain. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of old stone and something else, something sweet and rotten, like a grave. The cave was a tomb. It wasn't a place of healing. It was a prison. In the stillness that followed, they found the sunstone on a stone altar. It wasn't a sunstone. It was a moonstone, a large glowing crystal that pulsed with a faint silver light. But a shadow danced inside it, a dark swirling presence that made her wolf whine in fear. The stone was a cage, a lock, and the thing inside it was the key. "The Varg pack," Liam said, his voice a low growl, "didn't have the power to keep it locked up forever. They needed another pack to share the burden. They wanted us to take it." The truth unraveled. The Varg Alpha had not been fighting to keep the stone. He had been fighting to get rid of it. He had wanted them to take it, to become the new jailers for this ancient evil. He was a monster, but he was also a protector, because he was trying to keep the world safe from this evil. The world wasn't black and white. It was gray, a mix of good and evil, and it was hard to tell the difference. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We find a way to kill it," he said, his voice full of resolve. "We find a way to end this once and for all." As if fate demanded it, he pulled her close. The space between them burned. His scent in the air, a mix of cedar and rain, filled her senses. She felt it, clear as day. His hand moved to her cheek, his touch gentle but firm. He wasn't just a mate. He was her other half. The moment their eyes locked, the world outside fell away. It was just them. Just Elara and Liam. A simple truth. A powerful truth. A beat later, a different kind of fire bloomed beneath her skin. This one was not of battle, but of pure, unadulterated passion. It was a feeling she had not felt in a long time. It was the feeling of home. With his scent in the air, Liam's lips found hers. The kiss was not soft. It was hard and deep, and full of a love so strong it was a force of its own. It was a silent promise, a vow to protect her, to love her, to be with her forever. The space between them burned, a mix of moonlight and their own fiery passion. Her breath caught, her thoughts spun. She felt it, a deep, soul-shattering connection that went beyond their wolf sides. It was a connection to him, to their shared destiny. Her soul answered. As the quiet that followed stretched, they decided on a plan. The Varg Alpha was still out there, as was his corrupted pack. They knew the secret of the Sunstone now, but they still needed a plan. More importantly, they had a new, even bigger problem. Marcus's earlier words echoed in her head. He's listening. Because the Varg Alpha wasn't the only one who was aware of their presence. The evil inside the Moonstone had also woken up. It was a powerful, ancient evil, and it was watching them. It was waiting for them. It was hunting them. Now it wasn't a question of if it would come, but when. By the time they escaped the cave, Marcus was gone. The Varg Alpha was gone too, and a trail of blood led deep into the forest. They had won the fight, but they had also lost something that would come back to haunt them. Their world tilted, and they realized that they had just begun a new, more dangerous war. This war was not a war of packs. It was a war for their souls, a war against an ancient evil that could not be killed. It could only be contained. Her world tilted as she felt a new threat in the air, a cold, dark presence that made her want to run and hide. But she wouldn't run. She would fight. Because she was Elara, a Luna, and her soul was tied to Liam's. And just like that, everything changed. A new chapter was about to begin, and it was a chapter of a hunt for the evil that was hunting them. The wind carried his name, a dark whisper in the air. The wind carried his name, a dark whisper in the air. The ancient evil from the moonstone wasn't just a shadow. It was a presence, cold and heavy, a feeling like a hand on your throat. Elara felt it, a shiver that went past her skin and into her very bones. She didn't know what scared her more, the idea of a pack betraying its own or a thing that couldn't be killed. But one thing was clear. The hunt had begun, and they were the prey. Deep down, she knew the truth. Marcus's betrayal and the Varg Alpha's desperate plan were just little pieces of a much bigger, more terrible puzzle. A beat later, Liam pulled her closer, his strong arm around her waist, his scent a warm and safe anchor in the terrifying storm. "It's here," Liam said, his voice a low growl of pure protective rage. "I can feel it. It's watching us." "Because it wants the stone, right?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her heart skipped a beat. She thought she was so smart, a Luna with a new power, but she had been so blind. They had almost set a monster free. A monster was hunting them now because it wanted the power back that was inside the moonstone. That's why the Varg pack had been sick. The evil's presence had been slowly draining their life force for generations. It was a sickness with no cure. Varg wasn't the villain. He was just a protector trying to get rid of a monster, and they had almost made a terrible mistake. It was a big, bad secret that no one knew about until now. The whole world was about to change. "It wants the stone," Liam confirmed, his eyes darting around the moonlit forest. "But not to be free. It wants the stone back because it can't be killed, it can only be contained." With every heartbeat, the space between them burned with a new kind of intensity. It wasn't just love. It was a promise. It was a vow. It was a fight. He would do whatever it takes to protect her because she was his mate. She was his world. The air grew colder, and a fog, thick and heavy, rolled in, smelling of dirt and rot. It was like a blanket of shadow, a thing that stole the light from the moon and the warmth from the air. A sudden, sharp thought cut into Elara's mind, a voice that was not her own, but was filled with a cold, creeping madness. "You cannot win. You will give me the stone. You will give me the stone. You will give me the stone." Her breath caught. Her head ached. It was a mental attack, a kind of dark magic that was worse than any physical fight. Liam felt it too. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, a cry of pain escaping his lips. The silver from Marcus's knife was still in his side, making him weak, making him an easy target. She felt it, clear as day. They were in danger. She didn't know what scared her more, the pain he was in, or the thought that was now in her head trying to take her over. As the wind shifted, her new Luna power pulsed, a warm silver light that pushed back against the darkness. It was a shield, a sword, a protection. Her soul answered and she stood up, a force of her own. "Get out of our heads!" she screamed, her voice trembling at first, but then gaining a power that was all her own. It was a battle of wills, a mental war, and she was not going to lose. Not now, not ever. Her world tilted and she pushed back hard with all her might. She was not alone. She had Liam. She had her wolf. She had the moon. The air thickened with a sound, a kind of high-pitched scream that was not a sound, but a feeling. It was a scream of anger, a scream of defeat. The fog began to pull back, and the light of the moon returned. It was just a small victory, but it was a victory all the same. She had held it off, but she had not won the war. The shadow was still out there, lurking, waiting. What followed was a moment of silence. Elara looked at Liam, who was slowly getting to his feet, his face pale, but his eyes full of a new, fierce love. The love they shared was a weapon in its own right, a power that could fight back against the darkness. It was a love that was stronger than any evil. It was a love that was a shield. Later that night, with Liam's wound wrapped tight and the air finally clear again, they found a small hidden cave to rest. The cave was small and dark and cold, but it was safe. It was a place where they could talk, a place where they could finally be themselves. "I have to get this silver out," Liam said, his face a mask of pain. "I can't fight with it inside me." She knelt beside him, her hands gentle on his chest. Her voice trembled. She was so scared for him, so scared for them both. "I'll do it," she said. "I can do it." She wasn't a healer. She was a Luna with a new power, but she was going to try. Because he was her mate, and she would do whatever it takes. She would not let him die. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't take the silver out without hurting him, and a lot. The pain would be too much. "I'm scared," she whispered, the words hanging in the air between them. "I'm so scared." "I know," he said, his hand finding hers. "But we're in this together. Always." As if the forest watched, he leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was slow and deep and full of a tenderness that made her heart ache. It was a promise. It was a vow. It was a silent conversation, a dialogue of love. She didn't need words. The space between them burned. This was a sizzling, emotional moment, a moment of passion and love and pure, raw emotion. She was a Luna. He was an Alpha. They were mates. They were a team. In the quiet that followed, they lay in each other's arms. They were alone in the dark, but they were together. His scent was a balm against the cold, a comfort that made her feel safe. But then a thought came to her, a terrible, terrifying thought. She didn't have to use her new power on a weapon. She could use it to heal. She could use it to get the silver out. It was a dangerous thought. It was a stupid thought. It was a crazy thought. But maybe it was their only chance. "The power," she whispered, her voice barely a sound. "The moon's power. What if it can heal you?" He looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise. "It's too dangerous, Elara. We don't know what it will do." "I have to try," she said. "I have to. I'm not a healer, but I'm a Luna, and I'm your mate. I won't let you die." With his scent in the air, she leaned down, her lips finding the wound on his side. Her power, the silver moonlight, flowed from her body into his. Her bones remembered him. The mark tingled. Her soul answered. Her world tilted, and with a gasp, the silver dagger began to glow. And just like that, everything changed. Everything.